In the high-stakes world of corporate mergers, Julia, an ambitious project manager, finds herself ensnared in a web of betrayal. Her boss, Mark, uses charm to gain her trust while secretly sabotaging her projects to ensure his own promotion. As deadlines loom, Julia discovers crucial information that could expose Mark's tactics, putting her career on the line. With her future hanging in the balance, she faces a choice: play by the rules, or fight back against the dark machinations at play. This story highlights the need for vigilance in corporate settings, reminding viewers that not everything is as it seems.